My son said, "Don't expect a dime from Dad's $92 million. At the will reading, he turned pale when he heard my name. She's still breathing? Thought she'd be gone by now. Maybe we should check her pulse while reading." That was the first thing I heard when I came downstairs, still wearing black, still smelling faintly of the roses from my husband's funeral. They had barely tossed the last shovel of earth before the family gathered back at the estate. Not for mourning, not for memories, but for the feast and the fortune. The hallway buzzed with voices, laughter, and the soft thump of shoes marching through what used to be my sanctuary. I stood at the foot of the stairs, gripping the banister my husband once polished by hand, and watched them divide up my life like vultures around a carcass. "This one's mine," my grandson said, slapping a neon green sticky note onto the grandfather clock, then the leather armchair, then the cabinet with our wedding china. He moved like a man in a showroom claiming prizes he hadn't earned. His sister pointed her phone at the wall, an app open with blueprints and measuring lines. "We'll remodel this once she's out," she said to no one in particular. "Spa room maybe. Definitely better lighting." No one offered a chair. No one paused. My daughter-in-law appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. "We're celebrating Dad's legacy," she said cheerfully. "He built an empire, and now we get to carry it forward. And clean out the ghosts," someone muttered. Laughter erupted. My chair at the dining table was gone, replaced with a folding one dragged in from the garage. One leg wobbled. No cushion. They pointed me toward the mudroom instead. I sat in silence, facing a mop bucket and a broken broom, with a paper plate of dry chicken and overcooked potatoes. No one noticed. No one looked. From the other room I heard them. "This house smells like mothballs and death," said one voice. "Let's strip the wallpaper and gut the kitchen." My grandson peeled off a bright orange sticker and slapped it onto the sideboard beside me. "This one's mine," he said, grinning as if he'd won a prize at the fair. I sat very still, holding my tea with two hands so it wouldn't shake. "Dad said she'd die before him," came another voice. "Guess that was his only mistake. She built soup." "He built an empire," someone added, and the laughter grew louder. I took a bite of cold chicken. Tasted like chalk. I swallowed it anyway. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. But I reached into my sweater pocket and felt the crisp edges of the document I had kept safe for years. A bank memorandum signed and notarized, dated 15 years ago. It declared me as co-founder and early investor in the family trust. My name was there, inked in blue, not black, the kind of detail that matters in court. They didn't know. They never asked. They think I am gone. They think they've already won. But what they don't know is that the quietest presence in the room may be the one who holds all the power. I stayed seated in that wobbly folding chair, the paper plate balanced awkwardly on my lap. They didn't notice me. They didn't glance my way. They were too busy laughing over furniture, labels, and imagined renovations. "Garden shed for her," one of them joked. "Better keep her pension checks flowing a bit longer," said another. I held my tea like a lifeline, listening as they tore through memories as easily as wrapping paper on Christmas morning. My grandson scribbled on sticky notes. My daughter-in-law clinked glasses. My son strutted like a general surveying conquered land. They weren't looking at me, but I saw every detail. The way they smirked, the way their eyes darted to things they thought they owned. And then I touched the folder in my pocket again. The edges were crisp, the weight familiar, almost comforting. 15 years. I'd carried it through birthdays, anniversaries, and sleepless nights, never letting a soul see it. Not my children, not my husband's business associates, not even my husband. It was mine, and soon it would speak. I chewed the dried chicken in silence, letting the chalky taste anchor me in a world that had turned cruel and absurd. She built soup. He built an empire, I repeated quietly to myself. Not just a mantra, an acknowledgement of what no one else saw, no one else valued. They whispered again, plotting their next moves. "The master bedroom will be perfect for a spa. We can paint it pink. I want the Hermes scarves." The room buzzed with entitlement and arrogance, but I didn't flinch. Their energy was loud, but it was predictable. I remembered something then, tucked deep in the corners of my mind. How the house had been full once, not with greed, not with names on sticky notes, but with warmth, laughter, and care. The smell of cinnamon on Christmas mornings. The soft hum of a record player in the evenings. The way my husband had carved our initials into the porch rail the day Joseph was born. All of it seemed like someone else's memory now, stripped away in broad daylight. I glanced at the sticky note slapped across the sideboard beside me. "This one's mine," he said. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. They had always believed that kindness was consent, that silence meant surrender. I closed my eyes briefly and imagined the folder open before me. My name etched in blue ink: co-founder, early investor, unseen but essential. The moments when I had kept the company afloat, quietly, without recognition. The sacrifices, the nights spent calculating, drafting, strategizing while everyone slept. All of it hidden under the guise of homemaker, of mother, of shadow. I opened my eyes. They were still there, unaware, drunk on imagined victory. But the pulse in my chest was steady, strong, undeniable. They might have taken my chair, my plate, my place at the table, but they had not taken me. Not yet. And then the thought hit me like a spark in the dark. When the will was read, when they assumed I would remain invisible, everything would change. They think I am powerless. They think my silence is weakness. But what if the quiet one in the corner is the one who has already claimed the keys to their empire? Hours passed, though it felt like days. I sat in that mudroom, the folding chair digging into my hips, my tea long gone cold. The laughter from the other room was relentless, a soundtrack of entitlement that made my chest ache. They were sorting, labeling, claiming, as if every object carried a deed instead of a memory. My son Joseph strode past, polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor, his face carefully composed. "We'll get the lake house. Boat's already under my name anyway," he said casually, as if speaking to a stranger. "The Lexus is mine," someone else called. I didn't flinch. My heart kept its rhythm, steady and deliberate. Every corner I looked in held another affront. Drawers were pulled open, perfume bottles tossed into boxes, silk scarves crumpled in careless hands. My wedding china, the rocking chair where I nursed my son through sleepless nights, even the old record player, the symbols of a life I had lived fully, were tagged with neon notes. "This one's mine." I kept my head down, silent. But inside I counted. Every insult, every dismissal, every whispered joke about my age, my usefulness, my presence, they were all recorded, filed away. I traced each memory back in my mind like a ledger. My sacrifices, my work, my contributions no one saw. And then I felt the weight of the folder in my pocket. My fingers caressed its edges and I let myself imagine opening it right there, revealing the truth. Every investment, every secret strategy, every move that had saved the company when bankruptcy loomed. They had never known. They had never asked. And they would never suspect. Dad said she'd die before him. Came another cruel whisper from the dining room. She built soup. He built an empire. I kept my eyes on the floor, breathing slowly. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them believe they had conquered. The quiet ones always wait. Hours stretched into a slow, tense rhythm. I noticed small details, the things they missed in their arrogance. The way my granddaughter hesitated before taking the silver tray. The way my grandson rolled his eyes at the sticky notes, already bored with the game of claiming things he didn't understand. The house smelled faintly of roses still, though the petals had begun to wilt. Even the scent seemed to mourn the life I had built within these walls. I allowed myself a small smile, almost imperceptible, because a plan was forming. Every insult, every sneer, every dismissive comment, they were proof. Proof that I had been invisible to them, yes, but also proof that I had been underestimated. And underestimated was the most powerful position of all. I closed my eyes briefly and envisioned the scene to come. The will reading. Their confident smiles, their arrogant chatter. The assumption that they would inherit without question. And me finally stepping into the room not as a shadow, not as a ghost, but as the one who had built the foundation of everything they thought was theirs. They think I am nothing. They think my hands are empty. But what if the one who seemed the quietest has already been writing the rules of the game, and no one else even knew? The house was no longer mine, at least not in their eyes. Every corner, every surface, every object bore the bright neon declaration of possession. This one's mine. This one's mine. This one's mine. I moved slowly through the hallway, the wooden floor cold beneath my feet, sticky with dust and the residue of their careless footsteps. My suitcase had been shoved against the wall like a forgotten relic. My cot, the temporary room they had graciously assigned me, smelled faintly of bleach and mildew, but I made it mine anyway. I heard them laughing again in the dining room, voices raised over glasses of wine, over plans to remodel, over who would take the lake house, who would inherit the jewelry, who would inherit what they thought of as my life. They had turned memory into merchandise. They had turned love into ledger lines. And I sat quietly watching, noting every detail. Even as they celebrated, I counted. Each insult, each dismissive remark, every roll of the eyes, every whispered joke about my age or irrelevance, they were all stored in my mind, a record more vivid than any ledger could hold. They don't even see me, I whispered to myself. They think I'm fading like wallpaper, like the curtains, like the old photographs in the hallway. But I wasn't fading. I was remembering. I was recording. I was waiting. I traced my fingers along the edge of the folder in my sweater pocket, the folder that held the proof of every sacrifice, every hidden investment, every late night spent saving what they now took for granted. My hands had built the foundation they were trampling over, and they had no idea. I watched Joseph bend over the grandfather clock, peeling off a sticky note, grinning with the smug satisfaction of entitlement. He didn't know. He couldn't imagine. They had all been taught to dismiss, to overlook, to underestimate, but underestimation was a weapon, and I had wielded it quietly for years. I allowed myself a small smile. Let them have their victory. Let them measure and label and claim. Their laughter was loud, but it was hollow. I held my pulse steady. I held my memory steady. I held my secret close. When the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the estate, I finally rose. My knees ached, my back protested, but my mind was sharp. I walked slowly to the small window above the sink in my cot room and looked out at the roses my husband had planted. Most of them were wilted, forgotten. But there was one, a small, stubborn stem, still holding its ground. I smiled. That rose reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Resilience doesn't require applause. Strength doesn't need witnesses. And justice doesn't need to be loud. They were celebrating now, thinking they had won. But in their blind rush to claim, to label, to reduce me to a folding chair, a paper plate, a footnote, they had forgotten one thing. The quietest, smallest presence often carries the deepest power. I closed my eyes, inhaled the scent of dust and roses, and felt the warmth of the folder in my pocket. Soon, very soon, they would all learn that invisibility was not weakness, and that the heart that seemed silenced had been beating, calculating, and recording all along. They think they have already taken everything. But what if the one they dismissed has been holding the most important claim all along, and no one can erase it? The night before the will reading, the house was unervingly quiet. The laughter had faded, replaced by the low hum of exhausted footsteps, half-empty wine glasses, and the soft shuffle of packing boxes. I stayed in the small cot room, the folder resting beside me on the floor, feeling heavier than it looked. I listened through the thin walls as Joseph argued with his wife over who would inherit what first. "The Paris apartment should be mine," he muttered. "She doesn't even know it exists." Their voices carried like echoes bouncing off the hollow walls of greed. I closed my eyes and breathed. Every insult, every dismissal, every neon sticker slapped across furniture. It was all catalogued in my mind. They thought they had measured the value of my life in dollars, property, and pieces of jewelry. But I had measured it in patience, foresight, and quiet resilience. For 15 years I had been invisible to them, overlooked and underestimated. And that invisibility had been my armor. They didn't see the late nights I spent saving the company, drafting proposals, calculating investments. They didn't know that I had built the framework for the IPO that had saved everything, and that every victory they now claimed had my fingerprints on it. I allowed myself a small private smile. Let them laugh. Let them argue. Let them assume victory. They didn't know that when the will was read, silence would become my voice, and it would be louder than they could imagine. I walked through the quiet halls of the house, my steps soft but deliberate. I touched the sideboard where my grandson had slapped a bright orange sticky note. "This one's mine." My fingers lingered over the wood, tracing its grain. One by one they had taken things, marking them as theirs. But tomorrow everything would shift. The roses in the garden, wilted and uncared for, seemed to mirror my own existence in their eyes. Neglected, dismissed, assumed dead. But I was neither. I was alive. Watching. Waiting. Remembering. I checked the folder one last time. The documents, the handwritten notes, the letters, they were all there, proof of everything they assumed had been invisible. My life's work, hidden behind years of quiet, uncelebrated labor. For too long, my contributions had gone unnoticed. Too long, my voice had been muted. Tomorrow, I would reclaim it. Not with anger, not with noise, but with undeniable truth. Let them think I was just a frail, forgotten old woman. Let them believe that kindness meant weakness. Let them prepare their speeches, their arguments, their jokes. Because tomorrow their assumptions would unravel, and the quiet, unseen force they ignored for years would finally speak. I closed the window and turned to the cot. The folder rested on my lap now, warm with possibility. I tucked it against my chest, feeling the weight of years of silence, of patience. My pulse was steady. My hands were steady. My mind was steady. And for the first time in decades, I allowed myself to feel a thrill of anticipation. The world would see me. Not the ghost they assumed, not the burden they pretended I was, but the force behind everything they thought they owned. They think tomorrow will be their victory. But what if the quiet one in the corner has already prepared the move that will leave them speechless and powerless to undo it? The morning of the will reading, the house felt different. The air was heavier, tinged with anticipation and arrogance. They didn't notice me as I walked past, folding chair under my arm, suitcase trailing softly behind me. I had rehearsed my calm, my quiet presence, my patient smile. Joseph leaned against the polished conference table, fingers drumming. "She'll be dead by Christmas," he muttered to no one in particular. "Don't expect a dime for her." I kept my gaze downward, steady. Let him speak. Let them all speak. They were already counting what they thought they would inherit. They were already dividing my life in their minds. Mr. Alden entered the room, briefcase in hand, his presence commanding attention without effort. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today we execute the final wishes of Mr. Harold Braitwood, as stated in his legally binding revised will." The word revised hung in the air, subtle, precise. A ripple passed through the room, unnoticed by most. Folders were passed, pages turned. Joseph glanced at his wife, confident, smug, unconcerned with the quiet figure at the corner of the room. But I felt the pulse in my chest quicken. Soon it would all shift. Then Mr. Alden did something unexpected. He pulled out a small silver recorder and clicked it on. My husband's voice filled the room, slow, measured, unmistakable. "If my son ever speaks ill of his mother, deduct $1 million per word." Silence. The confident smirks faded. Pins fell from hands. Glasses rattled. Joseph's face turned pale. "You know how many he owes." I finally spoke, quietly, so that every ear turned to me. "He would," I said. Not loud, not forceful. Just enough to steady the room. My voice carried a weight years of silence had forged. Mr. Alden continued, methodical, calm, unshakable. The recordings rolled on, chronicling every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every assumption of my invisibility. He slid forward the printed transcript. Exhibit A verified. Legal. Binding. Every insult, every joke, every act of erasure quantified, tallied, undeniable. Joseph staggered, voice breaking. This isn't fair." I didn't answer. I let the folder in my pocket weigh against my heart, warm with anticipation. The documents inside held far more than debts. They held proof of every hidden action, every sacrifice, every silent contribution that had saved the company, that had secured the empire. Mr. Alden's final words sealed it. The primary beneficiary of the trust, the copyrights and remaining estate assets, are left to his wife, Eleanor Braitwood. The folder was placed in my hands, heavier than I expected. Inside, deeds, portfolio transfers, patent rights, and a personal letter from my husband, acknowledging the life I had quietly built alongside him, the contributions no one else had ever recognized. Joseph's lips parted, but no words came. His wife fumbled with her phone, probably calling lawyers, probably calling anyone to reverse what had just been revealed. I stood calm, steady. I had been invisible. I had been dismissed. I had been erased. But in that room, surrounded by the very people who had tried to make me nothing, I was loud, undeniable. the force behind everything they thought was theirs. They believed silence meant weakness. They believed invisibility meant irrelevance. But what if the quietest presence had been shaping the legacy all along? And now, finally, the world would see her name. The room was still. Not just quiet, but a kind of heavy, reverent silence that only comes when assumptions shatter and the truth lands hard. The family sat frozen, staring at the woman they had dismissed for decades. I held the folder in my hands, feeling the weight of years of sacrifice, of invisibility. Every document, every letter, every patent certificate whispered the story they had never wanted to hear. That I had been the mind behind the empire, the hands behind the work, the quiet force keeping it all alive while they played at ownership. Joseph looked up finally, face pale, eyes wide. "Mom." "I didn't know." I smiled softly. "You didn't need to know," I said. "I only needed to survive long enough to make sure the truth would speak for itself." The room seemed smaller now, suffocating under the weight of unacknowledged debts, of stolen recognition, of erased history. I walked slowly through the space, pausing at each marked object, each sticker claiming what was never theirs. One by one I peeled them off and let them fall to the floor. This one's mine. Not anymore. Not ever. Outside, the sky had turned the soft gray of a winter morning, the rain now a drizzle. I stepped onto the back porch, where the little rose bush I had planted for Joseph years ago leaned stubbornly toward the sun. Its single stem was brittle but alive. I knelt, knees cold on the tile, and poured water slowly into the dry soil. I whispered almost to myself, "We bloom again." Not because they believed it, but because we never stopped tending the roots. I stayed there for a long moment, letting the past settle, letting the future stretch open before me. The house, the empire, the memories, they were mine. Not because they recognized it, not because they valued it, but because I had built them and lived through them. And then I let it go. I sold the estate the following spring. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because the place that had held so much noise, so much greed, no longer felt like mine. I moved to a small penthouse by the sea in Santa Barbara. Wide windows, white curtains, the hush of waves brushing against the shore. I filled the space with quiet, with light, with the freedom to think and speak without interruption. The royalties from the patents continued, but I didn't need them all. Instead, I created a small foundation, modest but meaningful, to support women who had been erased, overlooked, silenced. Scholarships, grants, recognition, a way to give others what I had fought years to reclaim. Acknowledgement, respect, and a voice. I hung a small hand-carved wooden sign above my door, from the oak my husband and I had planted together years ago. It read, "This house was funded by a burden. Enjoy the silence." It made the mailman chuckle every time. I kept little things, a drawing from my grandson, a single rose stem from my garden, memories tucked away carefully. I never stopped remembering. I never stopped thinking. And I never stopped reclaiming my voice. For anyone who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or erased, remember, your story isn't over until you decide it is. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Invisibility doesn't mean unimportant. And patience doesn't mean surrender. I took a deep breath, letting the ocean air fill my lungs. The world was mine again, and this time I was seen. Fully. Truly. If this story inspired you, moved you, or reminded you of your own quiet strength, don't let it be a whisper. Like, share, and subscribe to Grandma True Stories for real tales of courage, justice, and the women who refused to disappear quietly. Your voice matters, your story matters, and sometimes, silence is only the beginning.